Ancient Farm surprised me right from the demo with a simple yet very engaging premise. Being a farmer in ancient Egypt, no tractors, no technology, just manual tools and the sweat of daily labor. It is as if the game wants to remind us that, above all, agriculture was about sweat, patience, and a direct connection to the land. This feeling of starting from scratch, with few resources and arid land to transform, is captivating and brings a dose of realism that few simulators manage to deliver. What caught my attention the most was the attention to detail in the gameplay mechanics. You need to plow, plant, harvest, build, and even craft tools, all manually without automation or shortcuts. This makes every action meaningful, and the sense of progress is palpable, especially when you finally manage to expand your farm or build a new workshop. It's not just about planting and harvesting, it's about creating a rural life cycle that evolves according to your effort. The game's aesthetics also deserve a mention. The first-person visuals and the setting inspired by ancient Egypt create a calm and immersive atmosphere, almost as if you were living through a piece of history. The traditional tools, simple architecture, and even the ambient sound help transport the player to a time when every decision directly impacted the farm's future. It is an experience that values a slow pace and care for every detail. A2 Softworks, the studio behind other simulators like Drill Deal, seems to have hit the mark by focusing on simplicity and depth. There isn't a myriad of complex features or innovative mechanics, but the game delivers exactly what it promises. A peaceful yet challenging simulation that requires strategy and planning. It is a game for those who enjoy feeling the weight of their choices and the results of manual labor. Still, it's important to remember that the experience may be limited for those seeking action or rapid progression. Ancient Farm is aimed at those who appreciate slower games, where the focus is on creating, managing resources, and building something that grows little by little with its own rules and challenges. If you enjoy that vibe, you'll feel right at home. If you're looking for adrenaline, this might not be the ideal title. Another interesting point is the possibility of facing market changes and seasonal cycles, which adds an extra layer of realism and strategy to the game. This shows that A2 Softworks thought beyond basic farming, creating a system that requires constant attention and adaptation, which can make the experience even more engaging over time. Ancient Farm strikes me as an honest simulator with a clear proposal and an execution that delivers exactly what it promises. An old school, manual, and peaceful farming experience, but with enough challenges to keep the player engaged. It is a game for those who value the process, the care for every detail, and the feeling of building something from nothing, literally. The story of Ancient Farm isn't told through dialogue or elaborate cutscenes, but rather through the path the player carves by transforming a piece of arid land into a thriving farm in ancient Egypt. It is a silent narrative built by daily actions: plowing, planting, harvesting, building, and surviving. You start as a small-scale farmer without resources or experience and gradually learn ancient techniques while facing natural and economic challenges that shape your trajectory. What touched me was precisely this absence of a traditional plot. The story is yours, made of choices, mistakes, and successes, as if the game were a living diary of your journey. There are no villains or heroes, just you, the land, and the time passing in seasonal cycles, requiring constant planning and adaptation. Every tree you plant, every animal you raise, every building you erect are chapters of this story that no one else can write. The historical setting also contributes to this sense of immersion. Being in ancient Egypt with manual tools and no technology brings an authenticity that few games manage to deliver. You aren't just playing a simulator, you are living a piece of history, feeling firsthand the challenges of the first farmers. The sense of progress is real because everything is done manually and every achievement carries weight. The game also shows that the story isn't just about growth, but about survival. You need to deal with market fluctuations, price variations, and seasonal cycles, which adds tension and realism to your narrative. It's not just about planting and harvesting, it's about making decisions that directly impact the future of your farm, as if every choice were a step through time. Another interesting point is the freedom the game offers. You can choose your pace, your farming style, and even how you want to expand your territory. This ensures that every player has a different story shaped by their priorities and strategies. There is no right path, only your path. A2Softworks managed to create an experience where the story is written by dedication, manual labor, and patience. It is a game for those who like to feel the weight of their choices and value every small achievement, as if every harvest were a personal victory. Ancient Farm seems to be a game that tells a story without words, but is full of meaning. The story of someone who starts from zero, faces the challenges of time, and transforms the land into something that carries their legacy. It is a silent but deeply personal narrative. From what I could feel in the demo, the gameplay is the kind of experience that wins you over more through its rhythm than through explosive content. And I mean that as a compliment. It takes the basics of farming, plowing, planting, watering, harvesting, and puts them into a very manual, first-person approach that makes every task feel like a small victory. The first thing that struck me while playing the demo is how the game insists that you learn the routine in practice. Picking up a tool, equipping it, using it on the right terrain, and repeating until it becomes a habit. Instead of becoming a click a menu and you're done affair, it tries to get your hands dirty, and that significantly changes the feeling of progression. When you finally look at an organized planted area after starting with nothing, it gives a satisfaction that comes from effort, not just from numbers going up. The crafting part was also the point where I thought, okay, there's a real game here. The demo already makes it clear that you will be unlocking and erecting structures like workshops and production buildings, and that building isn't just placing an item on the ground, there is a stage of gathering materials and finishing the construction with tools. This gives it a very grounded survival production feel without becoming too fantastical. Another cool layer is the economy and the seasonal cycle, with traders appearing and prices changing, as this provides context for your tasks. You aren't just planting for the sake of planting. The game tries to push you to make decisions, what to sell, what to keep, what to reinvest in, and this creates a nice tension. Even for a relaxing game, I enjoyed it because it creates that classic dilemma: spend resources now to speed up infrastructure, or hold back so you don't run out later. What I still felt was a bit stiff and might improve by launch is the weight of the grind. Since everything is manual, some segments can be tiring if you're having an impatient day. At the same time, for those who like a more hardcore simulator, that is exactly the flavor you feel the work, and the game doesn't try to please you with automation too early. This fits the ancient Egypt theme because it would be strange if it were too fast and comfortable. I also liked the ghost of content that doesn't fully appear in the demo but has already been announced. The loop promises to go beyond farming, including animal husbandry, foraging, and even cooking, so the feeling is that the game will open up more progression routes as you advance. This is important because if the final version delivers variety, the manual labor stops being repetitive and becomes a routine with different goals. Overall, Ancient Farm's gameplay gives me the impression of a simulator that wants you to slow down and enjoy the process, not just the result. If A2Softworks gets the balancing right, especially task time versus rewards and quality of life in menus and tools, it could be one of those games you enter just to harvest something quickly and suddenly find you've spent an hour organizing the farm. The graphics in Ancient Farm, from what I noticed in the demo, don't try to compete with ultra realism, but they deliver a visual direction that is very clean and pleasant to explore in first person. It's the kind of look that doesn't scream next gen, but is convincing as a whole. Lighting, vegetation, materials, and a setting that actually feels lived in. The first impression I had while playing is that the game is more beautiful when you stop and observe than when you are optimizing tasks. There is a great charm in how the environment is built, the sand, the arable fields, the trees, and the contrast of green against the desert, and this meshes very well with the idea of building a farm in a naturally hostile region. When that late afternoon light hits, the ancient Egypt vibe becomes much stronger than I expected. The modeling and level of detail aren't mind-blowing, but they are consistent. Tools, workbenches, and buildings give off a rustic feel, coherent with the proposal of a simulator without automation and with a lot of manual work. This is important because in a farming game, anything that looks plastic or generic breaks the fantasy immediately. And here I felt much less of that than in many indie simulators. What pleased me the most was how much the visuals serve the gameplay. You can clearly identify where you can plow, what has been prepared, what is planted, and what still needs attention, without depending solely on a heavy HUD. It is a functional beauty, and I really value it when a game doesn't turn into a carnival of icons on the screen for you to understand what is happening. Now, being honest, since it is first person, you can notice limitations in animations and physical presence at times, and this affects visual perception as well. Sometimes it feels like you are operating tools rather than actually using them, and this can take away a little bit of the immersion when you pay close attention to details. It doesn't ruin it, but it's the kind of thing that if the final version polishes, the game's visual level will rise without even changing a texture. In the most recent trailers, you can see that the game wants to sell a very specific fantasy. The visual progress of the farm, from an empty plot to a place full of buildings and productive areas, including more monumental buildings like temples. This is a smart move because this type of evolution is what provides a sense of visual reward in a farming game. You look at it and think, I built this. Overall, I would place Ancient Farm's graphics at that sweet spot of beautiful enough to keep you engaged and light enough not to depend on a spectacle. If a 2 Softworks maintains this consistency and just improves the polish animations, small transitions, and some interaction details, the game has everything to be one of those titles you keep playing just for the pleasure of walking through your farm and seeing the place come to life. The performance of Ancient Farm, at least from the demo experience and reports from friends who tested it, is one of the points that divides opinions. But in general, it is functional with some important caveats. On mid-range machines or those above the recommended specs, the game usually runs quite stably, but there are reports of stutters and sporadic freezes, especially in denser areas or when opening complex menus. The feeling while playing is that the game weighs more due to certain visual effects than the number of objects or NPCs. Those with powerful graphics cards and optimized settings, such as reducing volumetrics or adjusting VSync, can run it at 60 frames per second without major issues, but on high settings, especially in 4K, there can be performance drops and even crashes, mainly in menus or during transitions. Another point I noticed is the loading times and the fluidity of the menus. Sometimes the game became sluggish when opening the inventory, selecting tools, or accessing progress screens, which can break the rhythm a bit, especially for those who like to switch between tasks frequently. In some cases, the game even freezes or closes when trying to access certain screens, something I hope is fixed by the official launch. Even so, it is worth noting that a 2 Softworks has shown concern for optimization, releasing updates focused on stability and performance. Recent improvements show that the team is attentive to community feedback, adjusting everything from the search for empty planting areas to the way item data is processed. This is encouraging, as it indicates that performance could improve significantly by launch. What caught my attention is how the game behaves on different hardware. On weaker PCs, the game runs but may require graphical quality adjustments to maintain fluidity, while on high-end setups, with some manual tweaks, it is possible to have an almost solid experience. This shows that the game has potential, but still needs a final polish to be accessible to everyone. Another curious detail is that in some situations, the game may freeze or present specific bugs during character creation or cutscenes, something that can be annoying but doesn't seem to be widespread. I also noticed that disabling the integrated graphics card on laptops, for example, significantly improves performance, which shows that the game relies heavily on the dedicated GPU. Overall, Ancient Farm's performance is reasonable for an indie simulator, but still has points that need adjustment. If A2 Softworks continues to refine the game until launch, the experience could become much smoother and more accessible, especially for those who want to play without worrying about constant freezes or stutters. Ancient Farm is a game that, in my experience with the demo and following what A2 Softworks has released, left me with a very divided impression on whether to buy at launch or wait. It delivers a unique experience, but it still has points that might bother those looking for something ready right out of the gate. Playing the demo, you can feel that the game has heart and an interesting premise, but you also realize it still needs polish, especially in animations, menus, and performance. If you are the type of player who enjoys following the development of an indie game, seeing how it evolves, and doesn't mind bugs or minor instabilities, it is worth buying at launch. On the other hand, if you prefer more refined games without freezes, slow menus, or broken animations, it might be better to wait a while until the developer can release some correction and optimization updates. The game has potential, but it is still at a stage where technical issues can take away some of the pleasure, especially in longer sessions. Ancient Farm is primarily recommended for those who like calm simulators with a focus on manual routine, construction, and slow progression. If you enjoy games like Stardew Valley, Sunhaven, or even Tropico, but with a more primitive feel and no automation, you will feel at home. It is a game for those who value the process, not just the result. The game is also ideal for those seeking a peaceful, unhurried experience where every action carries weight and progress is felt firsthand. If you are a fan of historical games, building games, or games that require planning and patience, Ancient Farm will please you. However, if you are looking for action, combat, or RPG mechanics, Ancient Farm is not the game for you. It is focused on routine, survival, and management, so do not expect adventure or combat. Overall, if you are patient, enjoy indie games, and want to support a project with an original proposal, buying at launch can be a good choice. If you prefer something more polished and bug-free, waiting a bit might be worth it.